Hey everyone, this is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. We got Deekron Krikorian coming on here today, and I'm excited about this particular subject. We're going to talk about how CEOs and sales leaders can build out confidence, energy, and consistency without burning out, and why burnout happens, and what we could do to make our lives far less stressed and still accomplish our goals. And so he's an expert in the subject matter. He's written a really great book on it. And I was excited to have him come here today to talk about this because you are your business. You are your business success. It's that simple. And how we think and act and do, that all is going to give us the outcome that maybe we're not looking for or we are looking for, but we're going to talk about why and how that happens. So take notes. You're going to have a great episode here. Those of you who are interested in exploring our masterclass on follow-up, as you know, 50% of people never follow up with a lead once. Average sale happens on the fourth contact on a cold lead. Don't give away your sales to competitors, and you can gain sales back. We're doing this on Masterclass once a month on this particular subject. It is called, go to www.ceosalesstrategies.com/stop the leak. And we also have a newsletter that we're putting out that's getting great traction and people love it. So if you're interested in the newsletter, just send me an email at doug@ceosalesstrategies.com and just put in the title, add me to the newsletter. All right, let's go speak to Deekron right now. And again, get your pen and paper out. You're going to love this. Hey, Deekron, welcome to the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
How's it going, Doug? Happy to be here.
And you're coming from the sunny place of New York City, correct?
Yeah, sunny and cold at the moment, even though it's almost June.
It's nuts here. I mean, by the way, folks, those of you who've never lived in the Northeast, you never know what the weather's going to be like. And it's almost June, and it was 48 degrees here the other day.
So bizarre.
But I remember when I was a kid one time, it was in June. I remember I was playing and I looked up and snow was coming down. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, that was awesome. Back when I was a kid, now not so fun. So why don't you tell people, give people a little bit about your background and where you're at and what you're doing. Let's set the frame for this call.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. Happy to do that. So you can say I started life in a very traditional corporate role. My dad, who was a classic disciplinarian, he kind of pushed me to do something that was safe. And I started life as a CPA. So I worked for one of the big four accounting firms, EY, straight out of college. Always had a passion for being an entrepreneur, and I knew just learning accounting wasn't going to be enough. So I went back, got my MBA, did management consulting for a while, and then eventually decided, I want to do my own thing. And switching from corporate to entrepreneurship actually created a big breakdown for me because I was kind of like a classic high achiever to that point, get good grades, get into good schools, good jobs, etc. And being in the wild world of entrepreneurship, a lot of things that I didn't know started holding me back. And I felt very stuck and I felt directionless and I felt anxious. And it was kind of a dark time for me. That transition was really hard. And I wasn't moving forward with my entrepreneurial dreams, even though I had wanted to do it for so long. And at that point, I had to start looking for answers. I was like, why am I stuck? Why am I feeling this way? This just doesn't make sense. And at the time, my cousin was doing some personal development work, some transformation work. And at first, I was a little reluctant, thinking, no, I'm good. I don't need that stuff. I'm this hotshot MBA. I don't need anything like that. But the more I felt stuck, the more I was like, you know what? Maybe I should try something new. And that really opened up a whole world of self-awareness and growth and understanding myself and understanding how the world works and how we're wired as humans. And it would make such a big difference for me. Doug, I became inspired to pay it forward. And that's kind of what I do today as a coach, as someone who works with executives and entrepreneurs. I really help them elevate in the areas of what I call mind, body, and life and really transform those areas in sort of like this holistic whole person fashion so they can show up as their best at work and life and so that they can succeed while feeling good doing it.
So I heard a couple of really key things there. So, I mean, really what you're teaching people, if I can sum it up in a term is, how do you have more confidence, energy, and consistency without burning out and with being your true authentic self in business? And how does that allow you to grow your business? Right.
Yep.
And I remember so years ago, Deekron, I worked with Tony Robbins, right? And
I
so
saw
I
that
was,
on your bio.
and I remember some guy asked him one day, well, Tony, I don't want to learn all this stuff. I just fix my business. Help me fix my business.
Hmm.
And he looked at me, he said, you are your business. And it kind of gave a puzzling look on the guy's face. He was like, and it's like, listen, dude, if you can't perform and you're the leader of the company,
Hmm.
doesn't mean you can't perform, but if you can't perform at the level you want to perform at, then you're not driving the business.
Yep.
And people are going to look at you as the leader, you got to lead, right? If you're not leading, then,
Hmm.
people do as the leader does most of the time. Not all
Yep.
people, but most people. And then the ones who don't want to do as the leader, they leave anyways because they want to go do
Hmm.
something else, right?
Hmm.
So I heard that loud and clear. And I also heard something which was, I think he used the word hot shot MBA. I'm this hot shot MBA. I don't need to do this type of stuff, right? But you got to a point where the pain was big enough that I think you said the word stuck. I was stuck, that I'd give it a try.
Hmm.
And so, what I'd like everybody to write down for themselves at this point is, if you're feeling stuck in a spot, when the hell are you going to give it a try? When's the pain point? Just write down when that pain point has to get to this point before you actually take action. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to study personal development. That's okay if that's what it is. But, if your sales are stagnated or your sales are at a point where you're frustrated with them or you're frustrated with employees or you're having some challenges in whatever, your health,
Hmm.
when the hell does it get strong enough so you actually take action?
Hmm.
And I can tell you straight out, Deekron, I'm as guilty as anybody on these type of things, right? I just like regarding my health, I was pushing it off for many, 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 many years.
Hmm.
I've done it twice, stupidly. And I can tell you because, the business had to come first, right? That type of
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
I ended up in the hospital one time because of that.
Wow.
And I actually had an infected gallbladder. And I had a business meeting for an investors meeting that I worked 9 months to get. And I went into the hospital and the doctor said to me, we got to operate. And I said, it's just my gallbladder. I'll eat right, blah, blah, blah. And he argued with me for about 30 seconds. And he's like, Doug, he shuts the door and he goes, I don't think you're hearing me. You've been having these symptoms now for what? 2 years? I
Yep.
said, yeah, so what? See, the pain wasn't enough. You get what I'm
Mm.
going?
Hmm.
And I said, yeah, so he goes, I said, look, it's an investors meeting. I'll be back on Tuesday. We can come in and do the operation on Wednesday. And he literally
Hmm.
shut the door and he looked at me and he said, Doug, a normal gallbladder. And he held up his hand and says, is this thick? Yours is this thick.
Oh, wow.
And he said, if you walk out of this hospital, you will probably effing die before you get out of the parking lot.
Hmm.
And the reason I bring this up is that was enough of a trigger level, not death, but I remembered back when my dad had the same issue. And I remember being 5 years old, going into the hospital, being scared. And I never wanted my girls to actually feel that.
Mm.
Now, I tell that story because we, as CEOs and sales leaders, we try to fake it. We try to put the bravado face on. We try to act like we're the tough guy or the tough gal.
Yep.
And what we end up doing is burning out. in
Hmm.
some capacity. That was the universe saying to me, hey, stupid, slow it down, pay attention to your health.
Yep.
So, how can CEOs and leaders, sales leaders in particular, how do they build confidence, the energy, the consistency without ending up in the hospital, having a doctor telling them you're going to die if you walk out of this place,
Yep.
right? Without burning out, because a lot of people are driven to build their business, but they're actually never have built their life. They're building a life around a business versus a
Hmm.
business around a life.
Yep.
So how do they take that entrepreneurial journey and make it what they want without burning out? I know it's
Yeah,
a big question, but
it's an
on
excellent one, Doug, and I think it's one that people need to hear because I myself, when I had my tech startup, I did hit burnout, and it did come at a cost, and the cost was my marriage, and that was not fun, and that's why I do what I do today to help people not get to that point, not get to the point that you got to in the hospital. It's like we kind of need that rock bottom moment sometimes to change. Because, I mean, you mentioned Tony Robbins. I've done his work, I've been to his events. And one of the quotes that he says I love, he says, "We don't change until the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing."
right.
And so part of it is that is like, just don't wait for that rock bottom moment. Maybe just listen, this podcast, let it be your wake up call. Let it be that moment of urgency that you've been waiting for. Jim Rohn, who's Tony's mentor, says people need to get to a day of disgust before they change. Where is that day of disgust going to come? So it's that, but it's also what I call having a healthy relationship to success. So my brand, the Healthy High Performer, it's about that. It's having a healthy relationship so that you can perform well in a sustainable way and sustain your well-being. Because if you're not taking like this wholeness approach, something's going to get sacrificed. And if you're, let's say, chasing, the brass ring, because of, let's say, greed, because of perfectionism, because you've been always this high achiever and it's how you define yourself, well, you're trying to fill a void. And I can get into why we have that void, all of us as humans, but there's this underlying need for acceptance and validation, which we try to express in different ways and try to get significance in different ways. And for entrepreneurs, we have everything wrapped up into that. Our identity is that. So if the
Mm.
business fails, that we associate that with being a failure. And that is the equivalent of death from the point of being accepted and being loved by the people around us, which is key to survival. So, do you have a healthy relationship to success? That's the first question you want to ask yourself. Are you being driven by just external positions, the lifestyle, the accolades? Is that really what keeps driving you and ultimately driving you into the ground? Or are you taking this in a healthy manner? Are you authentically showing up? Are you like letting go of attachment? I was very attached to my tech startup working, and I worked myself into the ground, and I worked myself out of my marriage. And that, again, that was a big price to pay because I didn't have that healthy relationship to why I was fulfilling on that mission. So I think that's a big one. And then obviously we want to have routines and habits that sustain us. We want to be mindful. We want to start our day in an empowering way. I have routines that I teach my people how you should, the best way to start your day, the best way to end your day. Obviously, it's customizable, but you want to be starting your day not by checking your phone first thing in the morning, like 85% of Americans
Yep.
do,
Yep.
but actually grounding yourself and being intentional and fueling your body and raising your metabolism so that if you become more detached from like the constant go, 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 you take a step back and you're not as reactionary, and then you're in control and not necessarily reacting to everything the day's throwing at you, because as entrepreneurs there's stuff coming at us from all directions at all times.
So there's so much to unpack in there, Deekron. It's like I got like six different things I want to talk about here.
I should have warned you to have your coffee before I talked.
Because like that attachment type process that you're talking about, I can personally relate to that.
Yeah.
And firstly, thank you for saying I think maybe this podcast might be a wake up call for people, right? I never thought about the podcast in that regard, but it's like, I'm just come out here and bring real people on, have real discussions. And, but, I have had people tell me they listen to the podcast and they love this and this has changed and that. So this is,
Mhm.
so thank you for the validation. You know, having that attachment. I remember one time I was, and folks, this is going to sound a little crazy, just so you know. And this is how, to illustrate your point of the attachment thing. Um, maybe I'm telling too many stories about myself, but I want people to be able to relate, right? So,
Yeah.
I remember one time I was literally I was netting $494,000 a year.
Awesome.
I had a $500,000 in the bank. I owned my house outright, all my cars outright. The family was completely healthy. We owned every possession that we had 100% outright. And I had the availability for upward financial mobility in front of me to be able to raise my income by at least 50%.
Awesome.
And I was never so scared in my life
Mm.
because I remember walking out in my driveway one day going, what if I lose all of this? And then that plagued me for weeks. I kept walking around going, why am I feeling this way? Why am I ungrateful?
Mhm.
Like, because to me,
Mhm.
it's a lack of gratitude at that point. Like, and so this was in Texas and we were just outside of Houston. So I went to my wife one day and I said, I'm going to go down in the inner city of Houston,
Uh-huh.
like the places you don't want to necessarily hang out at night, right?
Mhm.
And I'm going to walk around and I'm going to complain to all these people there that I have everything that anybody would probably want, $500,000 in the bank, the house paid off, this, that, that. And I said, I just want to see how long it takes someone to kick my ass. That's literally what I said. She looked at me like, what? I'm like, I'm scared.
Mm.
Like, I'm not even happy. I'm scared. Like,
Mhm.
I'm there, right? And so I want to go back to like, I remember Steve Jobs saying in his Stanford speech, if you're doing things too many days in a row and you don't like them, it's time to change,
Yep.
no matter what you're doing. And I want to go back to the day of disgust because when does somebody actually, because I still fought that process for a long time. It took me
Yep.
about a year, maybe a year before I finally came into like, okay, this is just utterly stupid, right? I mean, I just pursued on, continued on, tried to bull my way through it. But eventually it just got to me where the universe threw a crisis at me to wake me
Mhm.
up.
Mhm.
And I'd love for people to know, how is that day of disgust that I think you said Jim Rohn, how does one know they have arrived there and that they've got to go, okay, I'm here. Let me do something different versus suffering for a whole year before the universe just kicks you in the face.
Yeah, it's a big one, and I think that's what it is. A lot of times, Doug, we wait for rock bottom. We don't change until it gets like so painful. Like oh my God, I really finally need to do something now. And like I said, for you, it was that hospital visit. For me, it was my divorce. For some people, it could just be they see their health slipping and they hate how they see themselves in a picture, or they get a really bad report from their doctor, or their spouse is like, I'm losing interest in you. Like that, it's usually something a little bit drastic that shakes us out of the automated loops we live in. And I tell people, like, you have to understand how the mind works if you truly want to be successful at sales, at growing a business, at anything. And one of the things about the mind is that it works in automation. It tries to make everything an automated habit. Why? Because the brain is the most taxing organ in the body. It burns more calories than any other organ. And because of evolution, our ancestors didn't have access to food all the time, so they said, okay, let's figure out a way to not have to think as much. And so that's why 90% of what we do every day is just autopilot. And we blink twice and the year is gone. It's like, well, how did the year go by so fast? Well, it's because we've been on autopilot that whole time, and we don't take a step out. We don't take a step back. And when I work with folks, the first thing I do is I put them through a 5-day challenge, and I ask them, okay, let's take a step out of the day-to-day automated thing, and let's look at where do you want to be in 12 months, And let's look to see what's in the way of that so that A, that can serve as not only like a perspective shifter to get out of the automated loops, but also as that catalyst so that it doesn't get to be too late.
So we're on autopilot because our brain's trying to protect ourselves.
The brain is trying to conserve energy. It's trying to conserve calories because needing more energy means having to hunt for more food.
Ah,
Yeah, they did a study. The New York Times published a study about chess players who would go in for like a weekend tournament, and by the end, they would lose like an average of 13 pounds of body weight. And the scientists were like shocked, like, how is this happening? You guys are sitting down half the time. You're not even
right.
moving. How are you losing 13 pounds? Well, they were so intensely focused on the chess matches that the brain was just consuming so many calories during that weekend.
That's fascinating. So, so our brains move over, Weight Watchers, move over, Jenny Craig, move over. We just have to stress you out and
Just do a ton of crossword puzzles. You'll be good.
that's funny. But that makes a lot of sense. So if our brain is trying to conserve energy,
hmm
but we're constantly taxing our brain over and over and over through one stress, through another stress, through multitasking, through focusing on things left, right, up, down. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, this isn't working. What's going to happen if all of these,
Yeah.
you know, uh, chemical producing things that are happening in our body and our brain is
Yeah.
now trying to regulate all of that plus all of this thought. No wonder people are burning out or getting tired or at that place because I never thought of it that way. But it's the brain's job to sort of protect the body as well as everything else, right? So
Yeah, 100%. And speaking of the chemicals, what we're doing is when we're constantly under stress, we're elevating cortisol chronically. And cortisol is sort of like this priority hormone. What its job is to move energy, and it's trying to move energy to protect us. It's like it's our fight or flight response. So
yeah,
when we feel that stress, it's the same response as if a tiger is running after us, or if we just get an email that upsets us. And
right.
so it's the same in the body, it's the same. And we're doing that consistently throughout the day. Cortisol stays high. And when it stays high, blood sugar stays high because it's like, oh, this person needs energy to run away from a tiger. And that's not good for our thyroid. It's not good for our appetite. It's not good for anything. So when cortisol is up, it deprioritizes all of the other systems in the body so that we can run away. But if you're doing that too much, all these other things start to become compromised. Sex hormones, the thyroid, the metabolism, blood sugar levels, it all goes haywire.
So it's like cortisol is taking a blanket and throwing it over everything else that is dysfunctional, but it continues to be dysfunctional. And cortisol is playing the game like, ha, you can't see all this stuff until whammy, something health
Yeah,
wise happens
yeah.
or
It's
other.
kind of Doug, you could think about it like a fire truck. When a fire truck's going down the street, all the other cars need to pull over.
Yeah.
And those cars will stall, they'll stop for a while, but when the fire passes, they start again. So those other cars are your other systems in the body. But if the fire truck keeps coming and coming and coming, well, now those cars are stalled and they're not moving forward anymore.
Ah,
So
and
how to
we
think
need we
about
we
it.
need all those other cars though, now analogous, we need all of that in order for us to run the other parts of the body.
Totally, totally. I mean, one of the things cortisol will suppress for men is testosterone. For women, it's estrogen and progesterone. So those things, we need those things for energy. We need those hormones to be productive, to have stamina, to do what we got to do throughout the day. But when cortisol is constantly up, it starts to kill that. And that's where burnout starts to happen. Is our nervous system is jacked up for too much for too long. And people get into this vicious cycle. Again, we talked about the habits, but it's like cortisol is high too long, so now I'm going to have some wine before I go to sleep, and that actually disrupts our sleep, which we don't sleep as well, and now the body's under stress, so cortisol is going to be higher the next day, and actually we want to drink coffee now because we're sluggish in the morning, and that jacks up cortisol even more, and now we're constantly in this like wired or tired frame of operating day to day.
So we're in a loop. We're in
Yeah.
a loop that we go down the left side of the loop and it might be okay for a few minutes, but then we're we're driving our car along on the circle, if you will. Tony used to call this the crazy eight, right? Like
Hmm.
a race car track, you know, it's in a figure eight. Go down one side, you're fine. Then suddenly your vehicle comes around on the other side, and it's like, oh no, oh no. And then you're back into this loop. But what
Hmm.
I heard is if you're not sleeping because you take the wine or whatever, and then you're not sleeping, so our brain isn't taking our short-term memories and trying to store them into the long-term memories at that point.
Hmm.
And so we're now jacked up even more while we're sleeping, but our brain, instead of having, I don't know, 100 gigabytes of space tomorrow morning, we only have,
Hmm.
say, 50 because we still got all
Hmm.
this other stuff hanging in RAM memory.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so then we go and get the coffee and then we start juicing it up again and we start adding more memories.
Hmm.
So we're as you said, jacking up our nervous system, but we're depleting our brain's capacity to actually be able to handle that which we need to handle to lead our company, to build the company with confidence, run people,
Correct.
and have the consistency and the energy that's needed.
Yeah, correct. And I don't know if you heard the story about Ariana Huffington, but one of her like wake up calls is like when she was in her kitchen one time and she literally was so exhausted from burnout, she fell down and she hit her head. She just passed out, literally passed out. And that was her rock bottom moment. That was her catalyst to say, "Oh my God, I got to change something." And she started a whole health focused initiative and website and movement to help to spread the word about the importance of like sleep and recovery and not burning yourself out.
Why do people do this? Like we, so like my thing is that I think people do this is because they have an unclear, untruthful goal. They're
Hmm.
not clear about what the goal really is. Um, my mother used to say this to me when I was younger, and I never ever, I was like, come on, I'm just like 15 and you're telling me this story, right? But she used to say, Doug, it's really sad that energy is wasted on the youth and that wisdom is wasted on the aged.
Hmm. Hmm.
And as I get older, I'm like, that was pretty darn intelligent, mom, you know?
Yeah.
And like, I think it's because people are buying into an untruthful, unclear goal. So they're chasing this goal, thinking that this is what's going to make them happy, fulfilled,
Yes.
etc. I would love to get your feedback on this because you're so well versed in this. Is that the reason that people are stressing themselves out? Because when they get to be older, it's like they start talking differently. Like, you know what, man, I did this. I never want to do that again. I never want to build this.
Hmm.
I had 3,000 employees. I never want to go back there again. Right? Like they talk like this, and then there's a few people like, hey, I just sold my company. I'm going to build another 3,000 person company.
Hmm.
So it's like,
Hmm.
what makes the difference, right? Like, is it one's clear about what they want and one's not? I'd love to know.
Yeah, it's a good one. And you know, Doug, when we can't explain something logically, it means it doesn't make logical sense, but it makes emotional sense.
Okay.
People are always driven by their emotions. And from the outside, we sometimes don't understand it, but it's like going to a smoker and telling them, you know, you should really quit smoking because it's not good for you. Does that make them quit? No, I mean, we tell them something very logical, but it doesn't work. It doesn't create change because emotionally they're still feeling a need to do that. And so it kind of goes back to what I said is like, do you have a healthy relationship to success? Are you doing this for a reason? Are you doing this? Yeah, and it could be subconscious. It could be like old patterns that started when we were younger, when our parents, scolded us for not having a perfect report card. And then we kind of associated winning their love and acceptance with having to be perfect all the time. And then we grew up with that. And now we're trying to do that again. We're trying to be like, look at my score, look at my sales figures, look at my bank account. Look, it's that's yesterday's report card is today's bank account. And people are being driven by that in an unhealthy way, but they don't realize it. It's subconscious. And that's like the deeper work I do with folks, the inner work to heal anything that is stuck from back in their childhood that says you're not going to be worthy unless you do this, unless you prove yourself in this way. You're not going to belong unless, you're perfect and you work more and you keep getting promotions or you keep bringing in more revenue. It's interesting, but once until we do that inner work, we're going to be driven by these subconscious fears.
And that subconscious fear is I'm not loved, I'm not good enough.
I'm not loved, I'm not good enough, I'm not accepted. And that's a threat to our survival because, again, our ancestors were tribal people. So if they weren't accepted by the people around them, that would be equivalent to being banished from the group and dying ultimately, like not having protection, not having anybody to get your back, and other tribes can hurt you, etc. So now we're always worried, like, am I worthy enough to win that acceptance by other people? And we'll do anything it takes to prove it. What either we just become like super people pleasers and try to be nice to everyone and win their acceptance that way, or just try to impress them with how great we are, how pretty we are, how funny we are, how rich we are, how whatever we are. So that's where it all stems from. And when that gets to be too much, people start coping with it in negative ways. That's where too much drinking happens, drug abuse happens, vices happen. That's where it all comes from. And when I see that, I don't judge people. I just try to understand what's driving it.
Yeah,
And even in your case, you at one point you had an unhealthy relationship to success, if you don't mind me saying, but you came
it's
over
true.
it. You overcame it. You were like your identity was so wrapped up in those possessions, in that lifestyle, in what you were creating, that if that ever was taken away from you, your identity would have been taken away from you. So there was no healthy barrier between you and what your business was.
So is it a fear our identity gets taken away from us, or is it a fear of an impending or immediate death that is, or is it a combination of things? Like if we had to break it down to one thing, like it's probably this one thing. Everything stems back from this one root. Is it a
It's
one root or is it a multiple root
Yeah,
system?
the one root for all of us is fear of death. Is I'm not going to survive. So your mind was telling you if I lose this momentum, if I lose, my traction, if I lose my business, if things don't keep growing and I go backwards, there's all this pressure on you to keep that going. And if I don't keep it going, then my business is going to fail. Therefore, you're going to fail. And there's a meaning. There's always a meaning that the mind makes. So if the business fails, that means something about you. That meant something about me as an
Right.
entrepreneur. If my tech startup fails, that's going to mean something about me. It's going to mean I'm not worthy. It means I'm not going to be this high achiever anymore. I'm not going to be seen as accepted. I'm not going to be able to prove to my parents and other people that I'm accomplished and I'm worthy. And that's the underlying fear that drives all of us because we equate it with death subconsciously, not consciously. We don't know that, but subconsciously, that's what drives us is that fear of like failing because that's associated with potentially dying.
So it's the perception of that and the rules we set up around that to protect ourselves.
Yes, exactly, which I call the overcompensation strategy. So you don't feel worthy, so how are you going to prove that you are worthy?
We overcompensate, and therefore, if we're doing something, we're distracting ourselves from the reality of what might actually be causing the issue.
Hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's why people drink to excess. So that's why people gamble to excess. So that's why people avoid certain things to excess. And other people look at them and going, it's not that big of a deal. Like, why would you,
Hmm.
right? So they're trying to avoid that perception of they're equating that rule as like if I get close to this, I'm going to get burned so bad that I might not survive it, and therefore I am gone, and that's my fear. So I'll create all of these emotions around this or this behavior. It's no different than objections in sales, really, when it comes down to it, right? An
Hmm.
objection is nothing more than an expression of some type of fear, small, large, medium, whatever.
Yep, 100%.
Um, Interesting. I have a friend, super nice guy, Russ Whitney, and I remember Russ, he was very successful in business.
Hmm.
And I remember Russ set up a rule in his company. They'll take a division or a new startup or whatever.
Hmm.
They'll grow it to $500,000 in revenue. Then they'll get together and they'll all have what they called a pull the plug meeting. So they determined right then and there, is this a viable business unit to continue to grow,
Mm.
or do we kill it at $500,000? And when I first heard about that, I was so intrigued. I was like, most people would be so happy in their first year to build something up to $500,000, right?
Yeah.
And but they build it up just as a test.
Mm.
So it's a different rule. So am I correct in understanding that, or incorrect, that if we're setting this rule up that we have this fear of death, or we're setting up this rule that if I do this, it means this, then that rule doesn't necessarily have to be a hard fixed rule, but I'm giving it meaning, because if I don't give it meaning, I'm gonna I'm gonna have to face the reality of what the truth is, right? I'm asking these questions because you got my brain going in all kinds of directions here, right? Is that the reason? Is it the rules that we are living and playing by that we actually create to protect ourselves? Are those the ones that are catching us and keeping us from building out that confidence that we know we have inside us, that have more energy and the consistency in our lives? Or is it something other than the rules?
I think the rules, yeah, the rules are set up to protect an image, ultimately, to protect an image of worthiness. Because again, if we feel unworthy, not good enough, if there's some kind of lack in our self-image of how we see ourselves, and we all have a version of that,
Yeah.
then we're going to set up, I guess, we're going to set up things to make it look like we are bigger than we are, or more successful than we are, or, that unworthiness will always drive us. And it's that void which never gets plugged. You'll never be able to fulfill it through the outside. It has to do with understanding how you're wired, understanding what you've been through, and then unwinding and healing those sort of wounds that you've been carrying, and getting to the point where you're a new person now, which is very it's a little bit jarring. I just did it with a client on Friday. She's an executive at a bank in the Midwest, and her whole life she's been a perfectionist. And for her, it started because mom was never happy and was constantly criticizing her. And she was like, you half-ass everything, you half-ass vacuum cleaning, you half-ass dishwashing. And she just grew up thinking that she was never ever going to be enough for her mom's love. And that's very traumatic for a child to feel, because we're so dependent on our parents for survival at that age, that anything they say, or that we perceive they say or feel, it stays with us. And because of that, she just became this hyper competitive, perfectionist woman, high achiever, really high up at a bank now, but still doesn't have peace inside, still wakes up with anxiety, still wakes up like things are not okay. And then I help her shed that coat. I shed that identity, which she had been carrying for over 55 years. And now she's a little bit like a fish out of water. Like, but this is what I've been my whole life. It's almost like growing up right-handed. Now I'm telling you, okay, Doug, now you got to be left-handed.
Right.
That's not an easy transition, but she's starting to feel clarity. She's starting to feel that she doesn't have to operate from pressure all the time now. And it's very relieving. And now our next session is going to be about, okay, so who are you really? And let's define your purpose so that you can live authentically from who you are, not these made up rules, like you called it, like these rules that you had to be competitive, you had to win every award, you had to like always be perfect.
Right. And it's not wrong if you truly feel, or if one feels that they want to be competitive, they want to win these awards, they want to, as long as it's coming from the authentic spot, right?
Yeah, a
Versus
healthy place.
yeah,
Hmm.
I call it the evil created twin, the other spot, right? I don't know, I'm Doug, right? And maybe, I don't know, it's Dugan or something that's actually, my altered evil twin or
Yep,
something,
yep.
right? Which I would make up. Like I made this up somewhere, right? We all
Hmm.
tend to, not all of us, but most of us tend to do this. Now,
Yep.
it's interesting you were saying that, excuse me, the mother was always picking, like, the laundry's not done the way you didn't fold your socks
Hmm.
this way, you didn't do this. I've actually seen it in the opposite too, Deekron, where it's like the mother. I have this associate, um, and she is absolutely stunning. Like she is model material.
Hmm.
But I have a suspicion based on our conversations, her mother was the opposite. Like, it's like, well, honey, your hair looks good, but if you just did it this way, it would
Hmm.
look, I think, better. Or, sweetheart, your lipstick shade is complimentary to you, but this one here would be more complimentary to you.
Hmm.
Or, it was positive picking away, but it wasn't like negative. It wasn't like, what kind of lipstick are you wearing? That's just for,
Right.
evil, people, whatever. It wasn't that. It was the absolute opposite, that she was being complimented, but at the same time, it was like almost like not, I don't know if it's one upping, but it was more like, but if you had this alternative version,
Mm-hmm.
this would even
Mm-hmm.
be more complimentary, right? And I remember one time we were on a business trip and I called and I said, "Hey, you ready? Let's go to breakfast." And she said, "Well, I've got to get myself made up and all this other stuff." I'm like, "I've known you for 10 years. Let's just go to breakfast."
Yeah.
And she goes, "Nope, got to make myself." I said, "I'll be right down." And I hung
Mm-hmm.
up the phone and I went downstairs and I knocked on her room. She opened the door and she said to me these words. I'll never forget this, Deekron. She goes, "You are the only man on the planet that has ever seen me without my makeup on."
Mm.
And I was like, she opened the door and I'm like, she's stunning looking. I mean, she just natural beauty,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Like doesn't even need it. Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, your husband has never seen you, who was a friend of mine, right?
Mm.
He's never seen you without your makeup on. She goes,
Mm.
"No, no one's ever seen me without my makeup on."
Yeah.
And I was like thinking at the time, like, wow, you know, what a mind, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like here's a person who has this outward the outward beauty, this inner beauty to her, but she doesn't feel like she can go out without her makeup on. So she's kind of
Yeah.
altering herself by putting the makeup. I'm not saying she didn't enjoy makeup. A lot of people do. What was blowing my mind is I didn't have that perception of her, but she had that perception of herself.
Yep. Yeah. To you and I, it doesn't make any logical sense, but to her, it makes emotional sense because
Mm,
she grew up in that environment. And again, maybe her mom did not mean to, put her down or did not have any ill will towards her when she was giving her those, I guess, those suggestions. But if just one time she took that as a criticism as a child and said, oh, wow, like I'm not doing this right, or I got to do this better, or I got to be perfect at this, or mom won't love me, mom won't accept me, she got stuck with that story. And that story runs her life now. And think about the pressure of having to always be looking perfect. And that's what I said. It's like we worry that we're not smart enough. We worry we're not pretty enough. We worry we're not rich enough. We're not whatever enough. And that was her thing. She wasn't pretty enough or perfect enough to please mom. And now she's stuck with that story, which creates, like you said, the rules. Her rule is, oh, I never leave without makeup. It's just her rule because it's like a defense mechanism.
yeah, which is, I mean, then I wonder as she gets older, like, we all naturally change, right?
Hmm.
And societal rules are men get distinguished and women get older, right? I mean, which I think is crazy, but how is that going to affect? So every stage of our life we go through, whether we're in our teen years, in the warrior years of trying to prove ourselves or whatever, um, how does this all change over our life? So I know for me, there's been a shift in values over my life for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
Certainly when I had children, and all of a sudden my values were very different.
Yeah.
And so I guess the here's my question. All right. I'm listening to this podcast. I pulled over the side of the road. I'm crying now because I'm like realizing whatever's happening to me. It's like, Deekron and Doug, I don't like you anymore, right? That type of thing's going on in my head. Or I'm pulling over and I'm just laughing and shaking my head like, what a fool I've been for all these years for like buying into these, rules and stories.
Hmm.
What is the thing that I can take away from this right now? The first maybe step or two or three. Obviously, if I want deeper work, I got to give you a call, or contact you, and we'll give that information just in a moment. What is something I can take away right now that says, okay, do this, and I'll start the momentum moving in the other direction of where I know I want to be?
Hmm. Yeah, good question, Doug. And I think it would be helpful for folks. So I would say as an initial step, you want to start observing what we talked about as the automatic patterns. How are you reacting in certain situations? So first, I guess take a step back and say, do I have a healthy relationship with success? And what does like things like failure and rejection, what do I make them mean about me and my self-worth? We all have a story about that. And if you feel you are burning out, feel you're like burning the candle at both ends, you're go, 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 nonstop all the time, there's a story that's driving that. And you have to get present to it. And you have to understand, okay, like, okay, what am I telling myself in these situations? And eventually you want to go back and understand where that started, because it started in your past. But ultimately, if you get a little bit clearer on what meaning you're making, associating with failing or not growing your business fast enough, or even, getting fired, going bankrupt, like those all have meanings associated with them.
Yep.
And once you get clear on what you make them mean, start challenging those meanings because they're irrational fears. And you have to start challenging is like, okay, if I were to go bankrupt, what would that mean? Okay, I'm going to get kicked out of my house. Okay, and then what? Okay, and then I'm going to, I don't know, not be able to have food. Well, is that really true? Or, can't you rely on somebody to help you to get through a period? Like just start questioning that fear because the mind will magnify fears. It'll just make them seem so much worse than they actually
Mm.
are. And that could be driving people, subconsciously. So if you pull back from the automated day-to-day patterns and habits and routines, pull back and be like, okay, what's really stressing me out? How am I reacting? And what do I make it mean if, let's say, I fail at this? Why am I so attached to winning? Why am I so attached to getting this right or perfect? Start questioning it because that'll start revealing the story that you can unwind.
So if I heard you correctly, it's create awareness of what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge it
Mm-hmm.
as its reality, that's what's going on. Then start questioning it in the terms of, is this really true? Is this really accurate? Or is this just the story that's being made up and broadcast over the radio of my brain? That type of
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yep.
And so create awareness and start challenging those moments. Well, maybe not challenging, but certainly discovering those moments of whether this is reality or make believe, if you will. I think that was the
Mm-hmm.
old thing from the 70s. Is this reality or make believe TV? That type of thing. Um, and yes, folks, I am that old. So the that is a great first step. Now, you wrote a book, right? If I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What is the book about? And well, firstly, what's the book about?
Yeah, for sure. So the book, Doug, is called The Nine Shifts. And it is what I call it's like a high performance manual. And it really takes you through the three pillars of our mind, our body, and our life. And basically, in each one of those pillars, there's three challenges that can get in the way. And we've been touching on a lot of the mindset challenges up to now. So there's that mind category. There's the body category, which for a lot of the folks I work with, they're over 40. So at that point, the body starts changing, the metabolism starts slowing, our energy starts going down, our hormones aren't what they used to be. So that it helps you overcome those challenges. And then the third pillar is the life pillar, which is things like external stress, people upsetting us, relationships, things like that. Managing limited time and managing travel and social events, all with the idea that you're going to free yourself from like the limiting beliefs that have been holding you back. You're going to elevate your body's performance and you're going to stay consistent despite the curveballs that life is throwing at you. So that's how you get confidence, energy, consistency.
All right. So you can get that book at
On
Amazon or
Amazon, yeah, the nine shifts, the number nine.
okay.
And again, Deekron Krikorian, I'm the author. And yeah, it's a bestseller in some of the health subcategories. So I'm pretty excited to it really encapsulated about 6 years of working with folks one-on-one and just seeing what they were struggling with and being able to just encapsulate it in a manual people can read through and people can pick and choose. It's a fairly big book, but I feel I've covered all the bases. So that way you can just pick and choose what you want to, overcome. So there's one chapter on motivation. If you feel motivation is lagging and you're like, excited, but then you get demotivated, there's a chapter on that. If you feel like your energy is not what it used to be, there's a chapter on metabolism. If you feel you don't have enough time to keep your healthy habits and your empowerment habits going, well, I teach you how to do that more efficiently so you can make sure you're not completely neglecting what you need to be doing.
Awesome. How do people get a hold of you, Deekron?
Sure. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and on Facebook. I'm the only Deekron, I think, on there because I spell my name phonetically, so it's pretty unique. So it's Deekron. So people search for that, or I'm one of the few people that was able to get their first name at gmail.com. So I think it'll be hard to get Doug at gmail.com, but
Very, very
I was
hard.
able to
Yeah.
get Deekron at gmail.com. So yeah, it's Deekron at gmail.com. So that's just an easy way to remember. And then my website is called healthyperformer.com.
Awesome. Well, I wish I could talk to you more and more and more. I'd love to have you back, do a session two. This was an excellent,
Sure.
excellent conversation. And folks, one thing, take action on what we're talking about today. At least start getting the awareness and the creation of the questions on and around that. And then if you want to go deeper, obviously reach out to Deekron. He's the expert on this particular subject. Deekron, thank you so much for being here today on the CEO Sales Strategies podcast and bringing your A+ game. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Doug. It's been fun, and I hope I didn't give you too much of a mental workout so early.
No, actually, it's always good to have a mental workout, right? It challenges our current paradigm and our beliefs, and it's always good to get that challenge absolutely on a daily basis because it helps us make better decisions and guide our life and where we want to go.
Awesome.
All right. Okay. What did you learn? I learned a lot, right? What is your day of disgust? In other words, when is the day that you say, okay, today's enough? Today's enough for either the negative or today's enough for the positive, and I want to do more. When is your day of disgust? As Jim Rohn eloquently said it, I thought Deekron brought up a ton of points, right? And I thought they were all very relevant, very salient points to your business growth. From somebody who has burned out in their life a couple of times, actually, I can tell you it is not fun. And when it happens, if it happens to you, there are signs that come ahead of the burnout. And if you don't pay attention to those signs and you don't pay attention to what your body's telling you, what the universe is telling you, so to speak, whether you believe in it or not, you are going to get signs and signals. If you don't pay attention to those, they get stronger and stronger. And eventually, if you don't pay attention to them, they throw you a crisis. For Deekron, it was his divorce. For me, it was ending up in the hospital. It's one of those things though, but you can tell in your body what's happening. Pay attention to what Steve Jobs said. If things are not going the way they are supposed to go for 2 or 3, 4, 5 days in a row, it's a signal for you to take a different path. And most of us human beings, I think because we're trying to conserve our energy and our brain, according to Deekron, we're on automatic, pilot, if you will, and we're trying to conserve that energy. So we don't take that energy and move it into a different place. We're just on habit, which is then just reinforcing the things that maybe we don't want. When you're selling, pay attention to this because people's habits reveal themselves in their buying patterns as well. It'll tell you things through the buying patterns when you're paying attention to the energy of the other person, how they're acting, their words that they're using. Remember, objections, for example, are nothing more than a discomfort that is manifesting itself into an emotional play. And your job is to find what I call the real it. If you want to know more about that, I wrote a book called Win-Win Selling, Unlocking the Power of Profitability and to Resolving Objections. Just grab that book and it breaks down the psychology and the philosophy of objections in its entirety. So, and again, go out and please do the first exercise, create awareness, start asking, is this true? Start to understand what's going on, because once you start to break those patterns, you'll be able to have different rules that run your life. All right. Speaking of rules that run your life, if you're dropping the ball on follow-up, we have a masterclass called www.ceosalesstrategies.com/the masterclass, Stop the Leak, right? Because you are losing between 5 and 20% a year, or you can gain between 5 and 20% a year by just doing follow-up the right way. We're going to teach you how to do that. We actually built the tool to do that. If you're interested in any of that, come to the masterclass. Again, ceosalesstrategies.com/stop the leak. Or if you want to join our newsletter, which is gaining popularity, just send me an email at doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. All right. Like always, go out and sell something today. Play win-win-win. They win, you win, someone else wins. Don't discount because you got to make up multiple sales for that discount. Improve your value proposition. You'll be able to improve your margins. You need help with your business, reach out to me directly at doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. Until next time, this is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast saying, to your success.